We're talking about the refugee crisis in Europe with Stewart M. Patrick. He is Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and also Director of the Program on International Institutions and Global Government. His latest article is World on the Move, Understanding Europe's Migration Crisis, and he joins me from Washington, D.C. Mr. Patrick, thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Larry.
This crisis, according to the UN, they're expecting something like 400,000 refugees coming to Europe this year and maybe the same number next year. Are these numbers historically unprecedented?
Well, yes, they are, certainly in the case of Europe since the end of the Second World War in terms of the numbers of refugees that are coming in. It's a reflection of the fact that around the world, actually, there are now more refugees and internally displaced people. That's people who have been forced to flee their homes, largely as a result of conflict. More IDPs, as they're called, internally displaced persons, and refugees than in any time since the end of the Second World War, about 60 million. And many of those, of course, are being generated by the war in Syria, which has had half of Syria's population of about 20 million actually have to leave their homes, either inside Syria or to neighboring countries.
Stewart, what's the difference between a migrant and a refugee?
It's a very tricky issue, and those boundaries can blur. A refugee is somebody who actually is claiming some asylum status because they have a genuine fear of persecution or experience of persecution, for instance, on the ground of their race, their religion, the fact that they're a certain population members. A migrant is a little bit more of a catch-all phrase, but usually we're talking about economic migrants. Those are people who are moving from one country to another, sometimes illegally or illicitly, and they're actually looking for, basically they're being motivated by economic motives. Now, of course, those can blur to some degree, but legally, in terms of international law, there is a distinction between the two of them.
Now, you've described the European leaders' reaction to this crisis as flailing. What did you mean by that?
Well, Europe was taken aback by this crisis. After all, there had been a lot of refugees in the neighboring countries around Syria for quite some time, and I think that they just were partly they were taken by surprise by the magnitude of the crisis and the actual numbers. But the other thing is that there are a number of protocols that the European Union has members, and there are 28 members of the European Union, have signed up to in terms of how they process refugees. But when push came to shove, there are very, very different attitudes in each of those countries about how welcoming the countries of the European Union, so Germany, for instance, versus Hungary, wants to be to refugees. And coordinating a common policy amongst the 28 European Union member states is always difficult, and in this case, it was really abysmal, particularly early on.
What are the main areas of disagreement among the European leaders?
Well, one of the big ones is about who should bear the burden of this refugee crisis. Right now, you've got countries like Germany and Sweden that are taking the lion's share or disproportionate number of refugees, and there are other countries, particularly those in Eastern Europe, but not only, that are resistant, partly for reasons of national identity. In some cases, they're saying, look, these are Muslims, we're not going to be able to integrate them into our country. In some cases, for economic reasons. And so the idea that there should be some equitable burden sharing amongst these different countries, that they all take their fair share, on the surface sounds great, but it also collides with this notion of national sovereignty. A lot of the countries in the European Union, including the British government, are not excited about the idea that the European Union as such should be able to dictate who they take in and who they don't.
How do the countries vet these refugees to make sure that they are truly fleeing the civil war going on in Syria, as opposed to coming there for perhaps illicit, if not terrorist reasons?
Right. There is supposed to be a joint protocol that all the European countries have agreed to. In practice, that has not really been followed, partly because authorities in places like Greece, for instance, or in Hungary have just been absolutely overwhelmed. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to process refugee asylum applications to tell whether or not, as you suggest, Larry, are these people just looking for a better job and a better life somewhere and want to sort of get in the back door by pretending to be refugees, or do they have a demonstrated fear? Now, one of the issues that you raised there is, could these folks be terrorists? I have to say that given how hard it is to actually get through the refugee admission process, that's probably not the first way that you would try to get in. But that argument has a lot of political salience. In fact, this spring on Capitol Hill, a number of Democratic congressmen said, look, the United States should accept up to 65,000 refugees from Syria. And immediately, that proposal was denounced by folks, particularly conservatives on Capitol Hill, who said this is just going to create a jihadist pipeline, which I think is a little overwrought. But those concerns are ones that you definitely hear aired.
Some argue that had Obama adhered to his red line threat against Syria, we wouldn't be having this problem. Does that mean that we have some greater moral responsibility here, perhaps, than even the Europeans?
I think that we have a shared responsibility with the Europeans in terms of who helped create the situation that has led to this vast exodus of folks. Not all of them are coming from Syria, but there's no question that some 4 million have fled Syria, and many of them have been in camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, for instance, in Turkey, and they're basically now voting with their feet. They say, look, we're never going to get back into Syria anytime soon, and we don't have great prospects here, so we're going to strike out for Europe. If you really want to assign responsibility, obviously the major responsibility lies with Assad in Syria. It also resides to a great deal with the Russian government, which has been foiling a lot of Western efforts to try to get a peace settlement in Syria. Now, it is true that the decision not to use military force and intervene in that country by the West, which was on the table, has had some moral ramifications, and it has created significant problems. Whether or not it would have been better if we had gone in is a really hard argument to make.
Stewart Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Larry.